Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back. You've joined our panel session on creating a robust and circular value chain. There is a concurrent panel that's running on commercial and heavy-duty vehicles. So if you've inadvertently joined the wrong stream, you need to navigate yourself back to the market development stream and rejoin there. We have had some questions from the audience already for this session, but if you would like to put your own questions in, then please do use the question box at the bottom of the window here. What you will notice is that we have 2 Ians and 2 Davids on our call, so if your question is for a specific panel member, then obviously please make that clear to us. So before we speak to the panel directly, here's a short introduction to each of the panelists and some of the themes that we're going to discuss today. That's going to play on the VT right now. Thank you.
While gigafactory capacity is being announced across Europe, we still see massive opportunity as demand is likely to outpace supply.
There are many challenges to setting up a battery manufacturing facility here in the UK, from the availability of the amount of land that you need, to the cost of that land, access to green energy, and also the cost of that energy is really, really important. Also, the cost of construction in the UK tends to be quite a lot higher than it is in other areas of the world. And that means that your upfront costs in setting up and building these facilities tend to be more expensive in the UK.
To make them economically sustainable, we need a strong local supply chain supporting the gigafactories with cathodes, anodes, electrolytes, foils, nickel and carbon processing, all of which are great opportunities for the UK.
We have a good track record of R&D in this field and have a fantastic opportunity to realise the potential from the development and scale-up process to full-scale UK manufacturing. Right now, researchers are better linked to industry than ever before with the Faraday Institution, the Faraday Battery Challenge and the UK Battery Industrialisation Centre, all directly connected and here to help the transition from laboratory to factory.
We're at the start of a very rapid expansion, and any small perturbation in the many factors that affect the market have the potential to significantly impact the way the market is going to look like in even just a few years.
So as we sell more electric vehicles in the UK, we need to be thinking about what's going to happen to them at the end of their useful life. We need a method of taking used batteries and extracting from them the valuable materials that they contain. At the moment, the UK has no real infrastructure in place to do that, but it does represent a huge commercial opportunity. So our challenge is going to be, how do we move the whole industry, the whole supply chain forward simultaneously and at pace to be ready for production in the mid-2020s? So I think you've heard from that introduction that if we're talking about building a robust and circular value chain, a big chunk of that is around batteries and battery manufacturing. So I'd like to open up the conversation with the panel by asking about what will be the main factors that would cause a battery manufacturer to choose to establish here in the UK or indeed not. And I'd like first of all to hand over to Isobel Sheldon from Britishvolt.
Hi Dave, yeah, really, really interesting question. I actually get asked this a lot. Why have you chosen the UK? And quite often I go back with a why not? The UK is just as good a place as any to put a battery facility, and in fact is better in a number of different ways. You know, from the ecosystem that we have here in research and development and the scale-up facilities of which Ian will obviously talk about, and the availability that we've had been able to get hold of the land that we require, renewable green energy. It's actually a perfect place to put a battery facility. So the UK is a really good place to choose.
And Ian, Constance, from an APC perspective, you're working with lots of different companies who are thinking about doing this kind of thing. What are the views that you're getting from them?
Thanks, Dave. I think it starts with everybody wants to understand where the demand is at. You know, when you're spending potentially billions of pounds or dollars building a gigafactory, you've got to know who your cornerstone customers are, who are going to offtake a big portion of your capacity. If you don't have that, it's quite difficult in a world which is innovating constantly to bring costs down and improve performance, to sort of decide I'm gonna make this without knowing who's going to buy it. So demand is the first sort of cornerstone of the discussion. The next one is the sites, and Isobel just touched on that, knowing that they've got a site that's ready to go, because what happens is that once somebody places an order, typically they want it then and there, and I've got to go and build a factory now, kit it out and so on. So they need a site that's ready to go. They need planning that's going to go through without too much red tape and bureaucracy, and so on. And also Isobel mentioned power. We have lots of discussions about the availability of power. It needs to be green, and the UK is good at that, but the downside of that is power can be quite expensive. So looking at ways to mitigate the costs of power. And then the next thing I think is supply chains. I think we'll come on to that in a second, so I won't dwell on that. But providing a local supply chain is critical. And then finally, recognition that we're in an international race here. And while you're in an international race, you've got to be competitive. And a lot of other international locations are putting huge amounts of money on the table to attract these investments. So those are the kind of things that we're talking about there.
Thank you, Ian. And your point about this being an international race is a very good one. David from BorgWarner, you bring an international perspective to this, of course. What's your view in terms of expansions in Europe and the UK, and what would drive you to do that?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a foregone conclusion that we have to play in all these spaces. You know, as both Isobel and Ian mentioned, localization and having supply chain set up, you know, where you build, especially in the battery case, you know, these are big, heavy things. They're not the easiest thing to ship around. And so having that locality is going to be crucial. And, you know, whether it's at the cell level or the pack level, the more you can localize, typically the better off you are. And when we look at this, you know, we have a objective of carbon neutrality by 2035. You know, we have a global presence. We're you know, across the world, but in order to support these goals, countries like the UK that have a really good track record on greening up their grid, you know, those types of I'd say intangibles, but now they're actually starting to be much more tangible these days. So these intangibles that are just outside of the balance sheet are going to be critical for us to move forward. So there's obviously a lot of decisions that go into that, but to say we're going to pick UK or you know, Germany or the United States, the answer is yes. We have to be everywhere, and we have to go where the customers are. I think it's going to be hard to deliver in the time frame as Ian mentioned, but we got to do it. Someone's got to do it.
Just picking up on one of the questions that's come from the audience, sir, is how realistic is it for the UK to expect this, and how does the rules of origin, the trade rules that we see both with the US and with Europe, how does that affect decisions from suppliers? And if David, do you want to pick up on that one first?
Yeah, I mean, it's like I said, it's one of the many factors. You know, tariffs are going to drive that. They're an additional cost. You can put in logistics, you can put in whatever bucket you like, but it's certainly a factor that needs to be considered. And in some cases, you know, when we look at our power electronics business, shipping is much less of a concern, but tariffs, because of their nature, still force localization in a way that wouldn't necessarily be the case otherwise. So it's important to factor those in. And when we look at diversification of the supply chain, I think that's the other thing that may override some of the tariff concerns. But there's no one answer, and there's no one thing that's going to determine location and regional strategy.
Thank you. And both you and Ian talked about the need for to bring the whole supply chain that comes with this. And I guess that raises a question for the UK as to how much of that do we think that we are able to deliver, and how much of it do we, if you like, have a right to deliver? Ian Whiting, if I could bring you in, please, to talk about our manufacturing capability. How do you think we stand on the ability to answer to the needs of that supply chain?
Yeah, okay, so right now we don't have a lot of the capability in the UK, and we're building it, and I think we've set up a really good infrastructure to do so. We kind of want to cover everything, but in reality, I think there's some specific things that we've really got to do. So we need to cover core material processing right through cells and pack assembly. it's not enough to be an assembly economy. We've got to add real value, and we've got to onshore parts of the battery cell supply chain, especially things like Ian Constance mentioned, the critical electrode materials processing, for example. And I think we've got a great track record of R&D in the field. Here we've got a great opportunity to realise the potential from both development and scale up to full scale manufacture in the UK. But it's a huge change, Dave. It's not excessive to call it a revolution. We need a massive increase in investment in both infrastructure and technology, and we've got to kickstart it with the things that Isobel's talking about, UK gigafactories. We've got to upskill the workforce. We haven't previously had the momentum, kind of now we do. So we need to create, the cohorts of engineers for cell manufacture, battery assembly. It's a huge task, but I think all of the ducks are in a row if we take it urgently and crack on, Dave.
And Ian, I know that your activity has been looking across that supply chain to think about which are the bits that we strategically need to play in and ought to play in. How's your view on the way that that's developing?
Well, it's clear that we need batteries and we need gigafactories. I think that's kind of an accepted view that if you want to assemble cars and have an automotive industry, you need a battery industry. But I think also motors and power electronics are a critical part of this ecosystem. I think the great thing about motors and power electronics is a bit like we over-index on engine manufacture and export today. I think those parts can very easily be looked at as massive export opportunities. We've got some really superb, innovative motor technology companies in the UK. Some of them on the point of scaling, some of them in the point of getting into sort of relatively mainstream tier one activity, and we're supporting them. We would love to see them fly. And power electronics is a sort of hidden gem in the UK. We have people acting real expertise across the whole of the supply chain when it comes to these newly emerging wide bandgap materials, the high performance, high heat capable technology, new material technology that has the potential to revolutionize the industry, which the UK could lead in if we seize the opportunity. So, we are not devoid of opportunities here, Dave.
It sounds as though some of these are things that could be brought across from existing supply chains, existing activities that we have, and some of them are growing from scratch. So picking up on the first of those, David, as BorgWarner with a long history as an automotive supplier, how do you see the transition from companies that are traditionally providing to internal combustion engine supply chains into this new electrified world? Yeah,
I think that's and that's key. That's the question that literally everyone is asking right now. So as a tier one that's decided to go all in on this, I think we've kind of established that it's going to be possible, and we've seen this in the past. We've seen in different technologies throughout combustion. Dual clutch transmissions, for instance, just in 2012, there was, I think, 4,000 manufactured, and we're on the order of millions now. And BorgWarner played a key role in that. So transitioning up technology from, basically, these infant entities into, mature technologies is not new to the industry. The scale and the breadth of it is new. So I think that's going to be the thing that's going to test everyone, because it's all happening at once. We get to focus on things, as they come in an evolutionary standpoint and bring those up, and we've got that capability, but we're all going to have to do it at once. And I think that's going to be the challenge for us.
And Isobel, you're coming at this from completely other direction as a company that's come from apparently nowhere just a year ago to becoming the UK's largest gigafactory. How are you finding that experience of building the supply chain and being ready to move?
Well, it's really, really interesting because I think we've really got to take care of our ESG responsibilities, the environment, social and governance. And we've really got to focus on that carbon content in the supply chain to make sure that we're truly delivering a green product into car showrooms. And that's really led to a bit of a change in focus in that, initially you would think about putting a battery factory right next to a car plant. Actually, it turns out not to be true, having done the analysis. You put a gigafactory where you can get access to renewable energy. And the reason for that is you really need to start thinking about co-locating and vertically integrating in your supply chain, because these materials are made in locations where the grid is generally driven by coal. The environmental regulations are not as good as they are in the European Union, and we can't simply pick up those processes and do them in the UK or in Germany or in France. We have to reimagine those processes and make them more energy efficient, and sometimes this is something that hasn't been looked at for 100 years because it was cheap and you could just buy it in from abroad. And I think the long fragile supply chains have been shown up as being not an intelligent way of doing things, because you don't need much in the way of global crises to suddenly make everything grind to a halt. So relocating those supply chains is about those conversion processes coming back, feed them off renewable energy, and making sure that we can make them efficient enough to be competitive. And that's going to be a real challenge, but obviously one that we're on the way with.
And there's a question from the floor, which is, where do we see the role for battery recycling and disposal in this, both in terms of the end of life liability, but also in terms of materials sourcing? So, Isobel, probably this is one for you as well, I'm afraid.
Yeah, I was actually on a panel session the other day, an international one where people were talking about 70% recycling, and we have to be careful about how we look at this. Recyclate material is very, very different to recovery of materials and batteries. Typically, you're going to get to about 25 to 30%, and that's when you've got enough feedstock coming back. And things that we're just about to go into scale manufacturing, it's going to be 10, 12 years before we get the feedstock back. So the business doesn't stand up on its own 2 feet as a viable opportunity today, but that gives us an opportunity to develop the technology that we will need in 6 or 7 years' time to start dealing with this quantity of packs coming back, and then looking at that 25 to 30% recovery level to make it interesting as far as improving the ESG content of the batteries that go out in the field as new systems.
And that fast pace of technology change is another theme that's come up in the questions, and it's about, is there a risk on this that companies could invest too early, the technology changes and suddenly it's a stranded investment? I think maybe Ian Whiting, if you'd like to talk us through what you see happening around that.
Yeah, okay, David. So it's always a good question, but I think in investing too early, if you think about what the UK's done with a number of its inventions, if you like, I think we have had a tendency to maybe sit back and wait and maybe follow. Lithium ion's been around since the early 90s, so it's not early. It's actually quite late. So it's now about changing the way we think about products, and as Isobel said, about manufacturing in general. So I think we got a window of opportunity, and I'm hearing from organisations like Isobel's and many others that are really excited about the technologies, what they can do in the UK, and with very keen investors. So I think it's not. Let's not miss out this time. Thinking specifically about automotive, I can only really talk about batteries, obviously, but within automotive, if you think about it, battery technology is predominantly lithium ion. And so that's a critical focus right now. And advances in lithium ion technologies, such as nickel-rich cathodes, silicon-containing anodes, they're near term alongside such things as possibly sodium ion, for example. And there are variants of solid-state battery technology that look like they can be commercialised for large battery use as well in the medium term. And I think some people might think, well, okay, do we wait for solid state? Personally, I think the reality is it's likely that the commercial solid state technologies will use very similar manufacturing plant in order to be commercial in the nearer term. So I think hanging back and waiting is actually not an option for us at the moment. And Ian Constance said earlier, we got some gems in power electronics. We also do in battery materials, core electrode materials, and synthesis techniques for those. So there's a lot of that in the UK, and there's a great opportunity to pull that through, commercialize it. I think really with investors, it's very much about take the long-term approach. So Isobel's view about a 7-year approach. If people are thinking like that, we've got a great opportunity to pull these technologies forward.
And just briefly, obviously the R&D community in the UK has a great opportunity to be able to pull some of these things through, but are they properly connected? And, you know, with organisations like APC and UK BIC set up to bridge the valley of death, you know, have you got companies queuing up to cross that bridge? Ian, Constance, would you like to take that?
Well, I think, you know, the one of the strengths is that we've been at this for a few years now. I mean, the strategy that put the APC on the ground was really dreamt up 10 years ago, and we've been in business 8 years. So we've been funding low carbon and zero carbon technology for automotive, large scale, late stage projects, you know, and we've committed over £1 billion in this space in the last 8 years. And that's not all gone to the OEMs, far from it. You know, and I often get calls saying, why aren't I getting more from rather important people? So, and that's because it's really gone quite nicely across a whole range of technologies, Dave, and across a whole range of businesses. And so, yes, we are working with these smaller technology companies. The approach in the ATF, the Automotive Transformation Fund, is both about bringing through the technology businesses in the UK, as well as supporting the inward investment and the existing OEMs. So we have the network covers all of those, and it's quite an exciting group of people with a lot of opportunity and potential, frankly.
So I think that the picture that I've seen from the answers that we've got are that actually there is obviously the scale of opportunity in front of us, but there's also a very connected organisation across the UK to help all of this deliver. So yes, we've got a challenge ahead of us, but we've got the right mechanisms to work with. I've been asked to close the session by past, so I'm just going to give you each a sort of 15-second answer, which is if I handed you the magic wand now and said, right, there's one thing that you can change in the UK, which is going to deliver us that robust and sustainable battery industry that we're looking for, and you know, what is your one wish? And Ian Whiting, I'll start with you.
Thanks very much for starting with me, Dave. I think from historically, from what I've seen and where we are now, it's investors with the appetite for that longer term, that 7-year or so period. If they come on board with that, we can make this happen. And
Ian, Constance.
Oh, if I had a magic wand, I'd tap all of the OEM assembly plants and turn what their diesel and petrol vehicles into EVs, and that would give me the demand to build the gigafactories and the motor factories and everything else.
David.
Well, aside from a crystal ball, I would really like to see everyone just agree on the problem that we're trying to solve. Get everyone at the same table talking about the same things. I think there's a lot of people talking past each other these days, and so just getting everyone on the same page would be phenomenal.
And Isobel, that gives you a closing wish.
Well, it's to be able to wave a magic wand and get everybody to wake up and smell the coffee on this, to be honest. And really, my second wave of the wand would be to go back 20 years and tell everybody to do it then, because if we'd done it then, we would have been on top of the world, because we invented the lithium-ion battery in the first place, and we missed out on the commercialisation the first time around.
That's a fantastic place to finish. Can I just say a huge thank you to our panelists? The time has disappeared in no time at all. To Ian Constance, Ian Whiting, Isobel Sheldon, and David Maxwell. Thank you very much, everybody. It's been a great session. Thank you.
It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.